Hello, I'm Femi Oke, and I'm the new host of The Negotiators, the show that draws back the curtain on some of the most compelling negotiations around the world. This season, we're taking you scuba diving in the Red Sea, walking the grounds of a luxury resort in Uganda, and even aboard an aging oil tanker floating off the coast of Yemen.
We were constantly monitored by drones overhead, divers under the vessel, so it was not exactly a high-trust operation.
That's The Negotiators, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Inside Geneva. I'm your host, Imogen Folks, and this is a production from Swissinfo, the international public media company of Switzerland. In today's programme.
AI is the future of healthcare, or so we've been told. But what does it mean? Is it coming for your job? Is it saving your life?
Let's take advantage of knowing what is coming to act on it now and not be in reactive mode, not be in catch-up mode.
Soon, AI could silently determine what ideas ever reach your mind or what thoughts form within it. Your next action, your next decision, your next job or relationship or purpose.
I think we are at an amazing moment in history. We have in our hands the opportunity to do well, to save our own environment, the planet.
Grok, the artificial intelligence tool on Musk's platform X, is under fire after people discovered it can be used to create nude images, including of children.
We don't have any more that space between the moment we know it's coming and the moment it's there. It is there, and therefore we don't have that safe space to talk about what regulations we could have because there is already a race going on.
Hello and welcome again to Inside Geneva. I'm Imogen Folks. Now, this week, the world's great and good, or perhaps better called the world's powerful and rich, are gathering right here in Switzerland for the World Economic Forum. We'll see presidents and prime ministers, industry bosses and tech giants, all, the forum likes to tell us, getting together to try to solve our big global challenges. And let's face it, those challenges are huge, from climate change to the rapid and largely unregulated development of artificial intelligence to conflict, poverty and inequality. But there's something else we need to face. Those VIPs gathering at the forum have quite clearly failed to solve those challenges so far. Some of us might argue they're actually creating new problems and making existing ones worse. So do we need a new kind of diplomacy? Something based less on who is rich and powerful and more on knowledge, on taking advice from people who really understand the huge advances in science and technology that we're currently witnessing. And guess what? There is such a group right here in Geneva called the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, or GESDA. Late last year, GESDA held a debate where participants highlighted their concerns.
If we just, as you said, do things when they have already happened, then it's too late and technology has already evolved to the next stage.
Human rights, like every other field, is very much under the influence now of what's happening in technology and science. It's one of the destabilising factors right now.
War is a terrible thing, but at some stage in the past, human beings decided to write the Geneva Conventions to at least reduce a little bit the horror of war.
I was absolutely sure that a robot can't kill a human. We are living in the situation when we don't even have these AI ethics.
You heard there from Sylvie Briand, Chief Scientist at the World Health Organization, Jürg Lauber, Switzerland's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Sami Kanan, former mayor of Geneva, and Tatiana Valovaya, Director General of the UN here in Geneva. We'll be hearing more from that debate throughout today's programme, but let's start with an extended interview with Marilyne Andersen, the head of GESDA and also a professor of sustainable construction technologies at Switzerland's prestigious Federal Technology Institute in Lausanne. I caught up with Marilyne in a lively Bern cafe and asked her first to explain exactly what GESDA is.
So GESDA is a foundation based in Geneva that was founded at the initiative of the Federal Council, Department of Foreign Affairs, to propose a way to complement the International Geneva's agenda through an anchorage in science anticipation. So what we do is we work from what science has in its drawers in the future that we structure into 5, 10, 25 years. And we start from there to show what the possible futures are due to scientific advances, which currently are quite fast and quite transformative, so as to show that it is worth doing something about this information today before these advances actually take place. So to take advantage of the space that we have between now that we know what the possible futures and tomorrow when these scientific advances will have happened, to prepare for them, to prepare legislation, collaboration frameworks, cooperation models, all of this to make sure that science is accessible to all, that we have safeguards, and so on. And so we go from that science anticipation into also training to gain that anticipatory mindset, but also to acting, to transitioning from this anticipation work into actual projects in different parts of the world to get on the ground, get in the field, in the transformation of the society to be ready for these changes.
For many among us currently feeling utter dismay about the state of the world right now, Marilyne's ideas sound really positive. My immediate reaction, let's get started on that collaboration right now. But if we go back to that GESDA debate where participants carefully unpicked the challenges we face, Jürg Lauber and Tatiana Valovaya were concerned that even starting now might be too late.
We are talking a lot about how we missed the train on the internet, how we probably missed it on AI, how we will be able to address quantum, etc. But at the same time, what we also face today is we are increasingly, I think, not understanding what the people, how societies evolve and how societies are becoming more and more skeptical of institutions and why that is and what kind of response that requires.
It's absolutely clear that these days we can't have a proper economy unless you have access to internet. And even wider, when we use, for example, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT is getting wiser, is getting more politically correct. But still, if you work hard with it, you see ChatGPT still thinks like a white male. And quite often, after long discussion, it gives you something and you're just stricken how outdated it is.
And so I had more questions for Marilyne Andersen.
I'm just thinking about the kind of scientific developments which might benefit from this anticipation. Possibly all of them, since people are a bit nervous of the new and a bit nervous of change. But the one that springs to mind most immediately is artificial intelligence, AI, which is progressing rapidly. And yet there is, even if we look at the forerunner of AI, perhaps social media, a real disconnect or disagreement between different countries about whether there should be any regulation or diplomacy, if you like, at all. Do you see that as something that GESDA could address?
So there are many dimensions in that question. First, on the influence of AI and on what transformation it brings. It is in itself, of course, a novelty, and the fact that it is now in our daily lives is very new and will have, or is already having, deeply transformative impacts on how we work, what we rely on to seek for the truth, and ultimately for the next generations will have an influence on how even our brains will evolve, because they will be confronted to answers about everything which we didn't have before. At the same time, it plays the role of an accelerating factor for the other scientific developments, for other scientific advances, let's say neurotech, discovery, synthetic biology, gene editing, protein unfolding. All of these have now the capacity to go much faster because they can rely on AI. So this is great because that means we can go faster in discovery. It is also making the difference between the pace of science advances and the pace of diplomacy or institutions more distinct, let's say. And then there is the role of GESDA in all this, which is, as I said before, really focused on anticipating what is coming. When it comes to AI, it's basically there already. So there is not much to anticipate, except anticipate maybe the changes that this will happen or the transformative impact it will have on other domains. Also, we are trying to move to artificial general intelligence, and there is a race going on there. So all of these are aspects where GESDA can play a role, especially when we think about embodied AI in the future or the influence on robotics, so things that haven't happened yet. But the regulatory question that you had is very much of essence now, but it also shows the fact that we don't have anymore that space I was mentioning before between the moment we know it's coming and the moment it's there. It is there, and therefore we don't have that safe space to talk about what regulations we could have because there is already a race going on. The tech companies are racing against each other to be the fastest, the first, and that means regulation is tough to implement at this point.
These tech companies also seem to be influencing some governments, buying some governments, some people would say. Maybe you don't want to comment on that, but it does worry people.
What is worrying or what is very different is that it is a development that is not really anymore state-owned or state-driven, but industry-driven. I mean, a lot of the changes that are happening in the world are industry-driven, but in this case, there is this kind of power or decisional power shift that we are observing, and that can be worrying because whereas governments have at the heart of their mission the common good, the industry has at the heart of their mission financial return on investment, and therefore it's a very different goal. And this change in goal is not bad per se, but it does change the situation when it comes to transformative advances that relate to technology or science.
Can I just give you one example that is always in my mind? Because when I first started the Inside Geneva podcast, which is in early 2020, one of our first topics was lethal autonomous weapons. And the things that the people who were campaigning for regulation described to me were quite terrifying, but they said, we have time. They're maybe 20 years away. They're here. We've seen them. Well, you said we have no space with AI anymore. Do we have space for anything? Can GESDA or the people in GESDA, I know it's a great idea, but can you actually influence anything?
I mean, there are many developments that we know are coming, but are not here yet. For example, quantum computing. Many people are working on it. It is gaining momentum and so on, but we are still in some kind of a pilot or lab phase for this. So we can prepare for it. So yes, in many cases, there is the space. Maybe the space is not as long as our linear brains are expecting it to be. So we may be a little too conservative in thinking out into the future, like what is coming in 5, 10, 25 years. Well, maybe this will be a shrinking timescale compared to what we thought. But there are several aspects that are where there is a lot of talk about it, like, for example, BCI, brain-computer interface, but it is actually still in a lab phase. It's amazing what is happening, but it's one individual at a time.
Just explain for our listeners what that is. Not everybody will know what brain-computer interface. I mean, I feel a slight chill running down my spine even hearing the phrase, but anyway.
Yes, it is actually it's an amazing advance that also raises big questions. So the amazingness in it is that it can heal. Basically, the brain-computer interface is literally what it is to make an interface between the brain and a machine. And therefore, to have a machine help the brain and therefore the human, in the case of humans, do something either better or something that they weren't able to do before. such as people suffering from paralysis, to be able to walk again if you can bypass the injury and connect the very well-functioning parts of your body with the very well-functioning brain, but it's just the passing of the signal that doesn't work anymore. So this is already happening in labs and in startups and so on. And it also can, for someone who cannot see, will sort of bring vision by interpreting the signal that the brain is receiving, even if something along the line between the eye and the brain is not working anymore. So it has amazing promises. But of course, as long as we talk about therapeutic applications, it's wonderful. But if you can do that, that means you can also do more. You can also, in a way, augment the capacities of very healthy individuals that then can be connected to the internet permanently, for example, and therefore have contact with a wealth of knowledge that we didn't have before. This is something that we should look into to make sure that we go into a direction that we want. And therefore, we should use the space between now that we are working on this and then when it will become more mainstream, which is not the case yet, to look at what safeguards, what guidelines, what frameworks should be put in place to not derail and to sort of keep control over exactly what we want to do with it and not let it lead us into directions we may not want.
Guidelines, frameworks, developing and upholding them are at the very heart of International Geneva. But how much does the rest of the world really think about these things nowadays? Increasingly, it seems that power and the power bestowed by money are the deciding factors, something that, at that GESDA debate, worried Sami Kanan.
What makes me nervous is that it's beyond money. It's about values and rules and the whole framework of multilateralism, which is challenged. And to be a little bit provocative, I think multilateralism, if you define it at the core, is the expression that public institutions have a crucial role in handling collective issues and finding solutions together.
And even though we do have some frameworks, Sylvie Briand of the World Health Organization reminded us that when faced with the global challenge of COVID-19, our basic principles of fairness and equality didn't help us.
We need also more equitable research ecosystems. Because if I take the example for the mRNA vaccine, for instance, the first vaccine required a cold chain at minus 80 degrees. And this is a kind of cold chain that doesn't exist anywhere. But rich countries were able to develop this cold chain at the early days of the pandemic, while many developing countries couldn't afford it. It was too expensive. So I think when we discuss innovation, we need to have this equity lens, and it has to be embedded in research ecosystems as well.
So do we need to strengthen international law? Now doesn't seem like quite the right time to find support for that. So Ambassador Jürg Lauber is still advocating dialogue.
We talk a lot about geopolitics, but technology is at least as important. The question is, do we need to adapt international treaties, instruments we have? Probably not. Probably what we need is a conversation about how we use them, what they mean in these new circumstances, how they need to be implemented. We need to build this bridge between diplomats and scientists, so the scientists can tell us what these new technologies mean, and of course what is further down on the horizon technology upon us. And for the diplomats then to discuss among ourselves, how do we prepare? What does it mean, for instance, in the field of human rights?
I'm still left wondering, though, not just whether such a dialogue can be successful, but whether many of today's political leaders are even open to it. Another question for Marilyne Andersen.
How optimistic are you that you and your colleagues can get a hearing and get diplomats? Because I know it's not just, you're a scientist, but it's diplomats in GESDA. That's what exactly the purpose. From my point of view, I see an utter failure of traditional diplomacy, whether it's over the conflict in Ukraine, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Sudan, or whether it's basic agreements to trade with one another in a civilized way, or to agree some basic humanitarian standards around the use of this new technology.
Yes, this is a very vast question. There is no doubt that the multilateral system is being questioned. It is not necessarily anymore the standard that everyone thinks is above everything and that we should abide to it. So there is increasing maybe examples where rules are changing, where the respect for this, let's say, status quo is being questioned. And when you change the rules, then for a world that lives on rules, you start to run into problems. Other aspects have, I think, a dual nature. On the one hand, we feel that maybe the current diplomatic system and the multilateralism in general, which is wonderful as an idea and as a principle, because it is how we get to an agreement between different parties, different governments, to do something together. So this is very precious to keep. But of course, if you need unanimity, it takes a lot of time. And at the same time, there is a pace that the pace question that we mentioned before. The pace of transformation is really very high, and therefore there seems to be a mismatch. And this comes back to AI, which helps us statistically to make decisions. And so if we let AI help us making decisions based on statistics and therefore based on an objective kind of an objectivity of what information is available, probably more objective than any single individual would do, we can go fast. But this also has a danger, I think, in diplomacy, because time has helped or is helping in the past the negotiation, the understanding of the other side, and the trying to find a way to come to an agreement. And this is a precious time, a time that we should value as well. So going fast in diplomacy is not, I would say, I mean, I'm a scientist, as you said, so I can only speak as a novice, so to speak, but is also something to cherish. So there is a lot of changes going on, a lot of questioning that hasn't happened before, a lot of rule changing in how diplomacy is being managed or done, which, when combined with the transformative nature of scientific advances today, I guess does put GESDA in a useful position. But we are small. We are only a group of 30 people, actually, with a wonderful board and the great support from Geneva and from the country. And so this is very precious. But we would love if this mindset was disseminated maybe quickly enough so that there is a momentum to combine maybe reinvented traditional diplomacy with the anticipatory angle and taking science as a real actor in geopolitics, which it has become today.
Let's look then specifically at science rather than the failure of traditional diplomacy, which we've talked about. We've seen particularly in the last 5 to 6 years, a growing distrust of science, which in particular we saw this during the pandemic. People did not want to trust the science. Does that make your task harder when you're reaching out to diplomats, to governments, offering your services to anticipate challenges going forward?
It does. I mean, if there is a growing mistrust in science, it of course makes science anticipation more difficult to convince people about. I think this growing distrust is linked to two bad reasons. One is to misunderstand what science is, and one is to misuse what science is. The misinterpretation of what science is to consider that science is truth, that science says something and then it's true. This is not how science works. Science is about evidence-based demonstrations of what we observe. Therefore, it's an evolving quote-unquote truth. It's an evolving explanation of the world and an evolving shaping of new discoveries for the world. So to be angry that in a new field coming with a pandemic that is very rapid and to some extent unexpected, to blame science for not having the final answer immediately is, again, misinterpreting what science says. Science will do experiments. very quickly. I mean, the rapidity at which the vaccines have been developed is absolutely amazing. So we should actually rather recognize that than blame the fact that we didn't quite know since the beginning whether we should wear masks and so on. So we shouldn't expect from science what it's not. It's not a dogma. It's not immutable truth. It is an evolving explanation. So this is the first problem that we probably faced with the pandemic. The other is the misuse, is to use marginal, pseudo-scientific, sometimes, let's say, outliers to reinforce your opinion that is maybe not at all science-based, and to then say that, use, for example, uncertainty, which is inherent in science, and to say that means science doesn't know anything on climate change, let's say. It's an absolute misuse of science to serve opinions. So these two issues have led to maybe a growing mistrust, and it is our work, but also the work, I would say, mostly of universities and schools and the education system and the research sector in general, to reinstate science without these two misuses and misinterpretations.
But today we live in a world where climate change is dismissed as a hoax against all the scientific evidence, and where leading politicians have connected autism with the use of paracetamol, despite there being absolutely no evidence for that either. Still, Ambassador Jürg Lauber continues to plead for open, fact-based conversation.
In my experience, when you bring in scientists who explain to you what the real issues are, not only does it help you to find a common language and common understanding, which is necessary to then come to conclusions. If you don't do that, your discussions will remain ideological, overly political.
There's no doubt, though, that millions of people are now anxious, frightened, even losing sleep over the current state of the world. What then can scientists like Marilyne Andersen say to reassure us?
People are actually quite frightened right now. Not just of the geopolitical state of the world, which is highly concerning, as I'm sure you have noticed or you agree. They're frightened about the pace of change. You know, they were frightened by the pandemic, naturally. They're frightened, or many people now, by this almost science fiction, except it's not fiction, the spectre of AI. People are worried about the developments of that. I mean, two things. What would you say to reassure people, if you can? But what would your appeal be to maybe the diplomats from governments who haven't quite listened to you yet, or are not quite on board with your project?
Well, I think we are at an amazing moment in history. We have in our hands the opportunity to do well, to, in a way, save our own environment, the planet, against climate change, but also to take the right decisions to bring humanity on a good path. The anxiety might come in part from sensationalism about bad news. We react very strongly to bad news because we evolved for that. We survive if we are very attentive to bad news. If we see a flower, it's great and we can admire it. This will not be a key to survival. Whereas if a tiger comes to attack us, we better pay attention. So sensationalism is mostly targeting bad news, and therefore we feel that the world is in a very bad shape. But actually, it is maybe because we don't give enough space to what is improving. Poverty, less child mortality, all the good things about health advances and so on, we don't speak about them enough. And we have in our hands, because of these technological advances, the means to do well. So I think the advice, if I can give any advice, would be that everyone in their own sphere of influence has in mind to contribute positively to making the world a better place. And this goes to absolutely everyone. Whatever your job is, whatever your age is, you can contribute to making the world a better place and maybe not be frightened or paralyzed by this overwhelming anxiety that is linked to what we read a lot about, but what is maybe not the signature of our world today. It's a world of opportunities. Now, when it comes to the role of GESDA or our interactions with the diplomats, we are working hard on trying to establish these relationships, on getting the word out. We hope that we are not alone in this mission to both make or continue to build the bridge between science and diplomacy. Science can serve diplomacy. Diplomacy is serving science, so we both need each other. And this anticipatory angle that we try to bring, I think, is probably very important today because of the pace and of the transformative aspects of science. And therefore, let's take advantage of knowing what is coming to act on it now and not be in reactive mode, not be in catch-up mode. The catch-up mode is what we tend to do because we go from one crisis to the next. So let's try to carve some space to also work on what is not a crisis yet, so that we avoid that it becomes a crisis in a little time.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Inside Geneva. Huge thanks to Marilyne Andersen and all at GESDA for a really inspiring conversation, which made me, and I hope our listeners, think again about how we might tackle the huge challenges facing us. I'm Imogen Folks. Thanks again for listening, and do join us next time on Inside Geneva. A reminder, you've been listening to Inside Geneva, a Swissinfo production. You can subscribe to us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our previous episodes, how the International Red Cross unites prisoners of war with their families, or why survivors of human rights violations turn to the UN in Geneva for justice. I'm Imogen Folks. Thanks again for listening.